Hello everyone. In this section we're going to cover some of the basic syntax and conventions for Lua. So these are just kind of global syntax issues. We will cover in detail some of the more specifics later in this chapter. Lua is a case-sensitive language, so a capital C is treated different from a lowercase c. This is in variable names, function names, in all sorts of keywords and other material. So keep an eye on your capitalization. Lua is not a white space sensitive language, so this means spaces and tabs are not recognized in the majority of material, including your tabulation of your statements. It does have both local and global scopes for variables and functions and the majority of data types. The Lua API functions can be overridden, so if you have a function that is part of Lua, you can in fact overwrite some of those functions. Tables all start at 1, not at 0, like most languages. And Lua uses keywords quite regularly instead of tokens, so there are more words than there are brackets and parentheses. And all functions have a dynamic return type, so if you've programmed in the past and used other languages, this means that what a function returns is dynamic, and the structure for that is something that you can create in the function. So these are some of the keywords in Lua. We will be going through these later in the chapter. So these are the words that are actually used directly in Lua, and they cannot be overridden. These are some of the tokens used. We'll also be covering a majority of these in the next hour. And these are also things that cannot be overridden, and they're part of the language directly. So we're going to go over also a couple quick elements of naming conventions. We won't have time in this particular element to cover everything, but we will go through them throughout the next few chapters. So indents occur for all statements. It is preferred to use 2 spaces. I will use 4 throughout my tutorials just as a personal preference, but you can use either 2 or 4 space indentation. We should camel case all of our variables. So for variables, the camel casing is lower on the first casing. If you are unfamiliar with camel casing, the concept is to have a function or variable name that is no spaces, no other dashes or lines between the words, and they all use some form of capitalization per word. We do camel casing for our functions with all caps, so the full humps. Our variable names are variable in length, so there is no specific name length for your variables and functions, but it is preferred to be based on scope, so the more global a variable or function is, the larger or more descriptive its name should be. You should use all caps for constants. So if you have a non-changing variable, a constant, it should be written in all capitals. And then if you would like to read more, there is a link here and in the project files for the recommended style guide. Now there is no official style guide written for Lua. There's nothing created by the creators of Lua that defines what should be done. But to make it most convenient to work with other code and to be able to share your Lua code, it's recommended that you use the style guide listed below. So go ahead and take a look at that and try to get an understanding of that after we get through the rest of these chapters. It'll make a lot more sense if you're unfamiliar with programming. Now, if you are familiar with programming, I would recommend to skip ahead or just take a look at the next chapters, because they are going to be going over the intro to programming logic and covering the basics of what a difference between a variable and a string is, or a string and a table. So if you're familiar with programming, you might want to skip through to the API section. If you have not programmed before and this is your first time, then I would recommend doing all of the sections of this chapter. So I will see you in the next sections.